I was living in Houston, Texas, in the early 1960s, married to Jacques, a man who seemed to have it all: wealth, power, and an unwavering focus on his career. Ours was a marriage built on appearances, a gleaming facade for the world to admire. We hosted lavish parties in our grand mansion, with chandeliers sparkling above and laughter echoing through halls filled with society's elite. To anyone on the outside, it looked like a dream. But inside, behind the gilded doors, there was an emptiness I could no longer ignore. Jacques was always away, buried in his business ventures, leaving me alone in that big, hollow house. Night after night, I found myself yearning for connection, for someone who truly saw me, touched me, not just my hand in passing, but my soul. That's when Melvin came into our lives. He was my nephew, a troubled young man looking for a fresh start, and I welcomed him into our home without hesitation. He was different from Jacques in every way. Melvin was raw, unpolished, and unpredictable. He had a charm about him that was impossible to ignore, and his youthful energy was a breath of fresh air in my otherwise suffocating routine. At first, he was just someone to talk to, a friendly face to share my days with. But soon, those innocent conversations turned into something else. Something I couldn't admit, not even to myself. As the days turned into nights, we found ourselves gravitating toward one another. Our chats stretched long into the evening, his laughter lighting up the dim corners of the house that had once felt so cold. I noticed the way his eyes lingered on me a little too long, the way his compliments felt more personal, more intimate. And I can't lie, it thrilled me. It made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was an electricity between us, a pull I couldn't resist, no matter how wrong I knew it was. Then came that night. After one of our extravagant parties, I was feeling the heady effects of too much champagne. The room swirled around me as I climbed into bed, the silk sheets cool against my skin. I drifted into a restless sleep, my thoughts a jumbled mess of guilt and excitement. And then I heard it, the soft creak of the door opening. I opened my eyes, and there he was, Melvin, standing in the doorway, his silhouette illuminated by the faint light from the hall. I should have told him to leave. I should have gotten up and closed the door. But I didn't. I couldn't. His gaze locked with mine, and in that moment, every forbidden thought I'd ever had about him was reflected back at me. He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. My heart raced as he sat on the edge of the bed, his hand brushing against mine. His touch was hesitant, almost questioning, but there was no mistaking the heat between us. I wanted to push him away, to scream that this was wrong. But instead, I let myself fall into the moment, into him. The warmth of his breath on my skin, the way his hands moved over me like he had been dreaming of this as much as I had, I couldn't stop myself. And in that moment, I didn't want to. It was a night I should have forgotten, a line I should never have crossed. But once it happened, there was no going back. That single moment opened a door that would change everything. For me, for Jacques, and for Melvin. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't just the start of an affair. It was the beginning of something much darker, much deadlier. And as I sit here telling you this, I can still feel the weight of that first touch, the way it lingered on my skin like a brand, a mark that would haunt me forever. That first night still haunts me. It was late, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I had just drifted off to sleep when I heard the door open. I thought it was Jacques at first, returning from one of his business trips earlier than expected, but when I opened my eyes, it wasn't him. It was Melvin. He stood there, hesitant, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. My heart raced, and not from fear. No, it was something else entirely, something I didn't want to name at the time. He walked closer, and I felt a strange heat rising in my chest. Without speaking, he sat on the edge of the bed. My mind screamed at me to tell him to leave, to remind him of the boundaries that should have existed between us, but my body refused to move. His hand brushed against mine, and the sensation was like electricity coursing through me. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, and I could feel his breath on my skin. In that moment, all the loneliness, all the frustration, all the yearning I had buried for years came rushing to the surface. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. That night, a line was crossed. A line that couldn't be erased, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. His hands explored parts of me that hadn't been touched in years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The guilt didn't come until later, when I lay there alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had just happened and what it would mean for everything I had built. After that night, nothing was the same. Melvin and I began to find excuses to be alone together. At first, it was innocent enough, so I told myself. We would talk in the study while Jacques was at work, or share a quiet drink in the sitting room after everyone else had gone to bed. But it didn't stay innocent for long. The pull between us was too strong, and soon, those moments of conversation turned into stolen kisses, and those kisses became something much more. We would meet in the farthest corners of the mansion, places we thought no one would stumble upon us. The thrill of secrecy, the danger of being caught, only made it more intoxicating. Every time I heard his footsteps approaching, my heart would race, and when he finally reached me, it felt like the world had stopped. His touch was everything I craved, gentle but insistent, comforting yet exhilarating. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the way he made me feel seen, desired, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. We were reckless. We didn't think about the consequences, about who we might hurt, or what might happen if someone found out. We were too consumed by each other, by the passion that seemed to grow stronger with every encounter. He would whisper my name like it was a secret only we shared, and in those moments, I would forget about Jacques, about my life, about everything that wasn't him. But passion has a price, and it didn't take long for the weight of what I was doing to catch up with me. Every time I saw Jacques, I felt a wave of guilt so strong it made me sick to my stomach. He didn't deserve this. Not from me, not from anyone. He had given me a life most people could only dream of, and this was how I repaid him. But the more I tried to pull away from Melvin, the harder it became. Every time I thought about ending it, he would look at me with those eyes, touch me in that way, and all my resolve would crumble. I tried to justify it to myself. I told myself Jacques was never around, that he didn't care about me the way Melvin did, that I deserved to feel happy, to feel loved. But no matter how many excuses I made, the guilt was always there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, making it impossible to enjoy what we had without feeling like I was falling apart. And then there was the fear, the constant, gnawing fear that someone would find out, that Jacques would come home early one day, or that one of the staff would walk in on us, and everything would come crashing down. It was a terrible way to live, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today would be the day our secret was exposed. I thought we were careful, but in a house that large, with so many people coming and going, secrets are hard to keep. The staff began to notice things, how often Melvin and I would disappear together, the way we looked at each other, the touches we thought were hidden but weren't. I started hearing whispers, seeing the way the maids would look at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I brushed it off at first, convinced myself they were just imagining things. But then Jacques began to notice too. He wasn't a man who showed much emotion, but I could see it in his eyes. He started asking questions. Why I spent so much time with Melvin, why I was always so distracted. I laughed it off, tried to reassure him that nothing was wrong, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. He began watching us, lingering in doorways, appearing in rooms where we thought we were alone. It felt like the walls were closing in, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The tension in the house became unbearable. Every glance, every word felt loaded with meaning, with suspicion. I didn't know how much longer we could keep it up, how much longer we could pretend that everything was fine. And yet, even as the fear of discovery grew stronger, so did the pull between Melvin and me. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and I knew it couldn't last forever. But I couldn't bring myself to stop. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. Jacques had told me he would be out late, attending a business dinner in the city. I took that as an opportunity, an opening to spend time with Melvin without fear of being interrupted. We were in the study, the door locked, the curtains drawn, our whispers mingling with the soft rustle of the night breeze. I remember the way he held me, the way his touch felt like a balm for all the years of neglect I had endured. I let my guard down completely, forgetting for a moment the risks we were taking. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, firm and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. My heart sank. The door handle rattled, and before I could react, Jacques was standing there. His face was a mask of disbelief, quickly giving way to anger. I froze, unable to move or speak, as his eyes darted between Melvin and me, taking in the scene before him. I'll never forget the way his voice cracked as he demanded to know what was going on, his tone a mixture of heartbreak and fury. It felt like the walls of my carefully constructed world were crumbling around me. The house, once a haven of silence and elegance, became a battleground that night. Jacques' accusations came fast and sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. He called me a liar, a traitor, a woman who had destroyed the very foundation of their marriage. He turned his anger on Melvin, his words laced with venom as he demanded to know how he could betray the family that had taken him in. Melvin tried to defend me, but his voice was shaky, his confidence faltering under the weight of Jacques' rage. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that we were in way over our heads. Jacques threatened to throw us both out, to cut me off from everything I had come to rely on, the comfort, the stability, the lifestyle. I stood there, torn between the man I had once loved and the man who had become my obsession, unable to find the words to fix the chaos I had created. Melvin, desperate and terrified, pulled me aside and whispered urgently. He begged me to leave with him, to abandon the life we had known and start over somewhere new, where no one knew us or our sins. His words were filled with promises of freedom, of happiness, of a future where we could be together without fear. But all I could think about was the enormity of what we had done and the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. In the days that followed, the house was filled with a tension so thick it was suffocating. Jacques barely spoke to me, his silence louder than any argument we had ever had. I knew he was planning his next move, preparing to sever the ties that bound us, to cut me out of his life and his will. The thought of losing everything, my home, my security, my place in society, was unbearable. And then, as if born from the darkest corners of my mind, the idea came to me. At first, it was just a whisper, a fleeting thought I quickly dismissed. But the more I thought about it, the more it began to take shape. Jacques was the obstacle standing between me and Melvin, between me and the life I so desperately wanted. If he were gone, all our problems would disappear. I tried to tell myself it was just a fantasy, a desperate thought born out of panic and fear. But the more I considered it, the more it began to feel like the only solution. Melvin and I discussed it in hushed tones, our conversations filled with half-spoken ideas and unspoken fears. He was hesitant, scared of what it would mean, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. He wanted to be free of Jacques as much as I did, and together, we began to plan. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far we let ourselves go. What started as a love affair had turned into something dark and dangerous, a game we were no longer in control of. We thought we could handle it, that we could walk away unscathed. But deep down, I think we both knew there was no way this would end well. And as I sit here now, telling you this story, I can only wonder how different things might have been if I had just said no, if I had just stopped myself before it was too late. We were past the point of rational thinking. The moments we shared, filled with passion and whispered promises of a life together, had blinded us to reality. Jacques was no longer just my husband. He was the obstacle keeping us from the freedom we thought we deserved. Driven by desperation and the belief that there was no other way, Melvin and I sat down late one night and devised a plan to murder Jacques. It was a plan born out of fear and desire, one that seemed, in our twisted logic, like the only solution. The idea felt monstrous, but the more we talked about it, the more it began to feel like an inevitability. Jacques was always away on business, his life meticulously scheduled. We knew where he would be, when he would be alone, and how to make it look like a random act of violence. Every detail was discussed, every angle covered, or so we thought. What we didn't realize was that there is no way to fully prepare for the weight of taking a life. It happened on June 29, 1964, in Jacques' Key Biscayne condominium. The air was thick with tension as Melvin and I arrived, our hearts pounding with a mix of dread and determination. Jacques greeted us with a faint smile, unaware of the betrayal lurking behind it. As the evening wore on, we waited for the moment when he would be most vulnerable. And then it happened. Melvin struck first, his movements swift and violent. Jacques didn't have a chance to react. The sound of the blows was deafening, each one reverberating through the room as I stood frozen in place. My breath hitched as I watched Melvin grab a knife, plunging it into Jacques again and again until his body lay motionless on the floor. Blood pooled around him, staining the carpet and the edges of my sanity. I stood there, trembling, my hands cold and useless at my sides. I didn't stop him. I didn't even try. In that moment, I became as guilty as he was. We worked quickly, attempting to stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. We ransacked drawers, overturned furniture, and left the front door ajar. But no amount of planning could erase the truth of what we had done. The weight of it was suffocating, each second feeling like an eternity as we fled the scene, leaving Jacques behind in a pool of his own blood. The investigation began almost immediately. The police combed through the details, their eyes sharp and suspicious. We thought we had covered our tracks, but inconsistencies in our stories started to surface. Questions we hadn't prepared for. evidence we hadn't considered. And then, the truth unraveled, exposing not just our crime, but the affair that had fueled it. The very passion that had driven us to act became the thread that tied us to Jacques' murder. And with it, the life we had dreamed of was lost forever. Asterisk. As I recount the choices that led me here, I am overwhelmed by regret. Lust and selfishness blinded me, and in chasing what I thought was freedom, I destroyed lives, Jacques', Melvin's, and my own. There's no undoing what we did, no erasing the pain we caused. All that's left is this story, a warning of how desire and desperation can lead to irreversible consequences. If this story held your attention, I urge you to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of love, betrayal, and the crimes that follow. Let me know your thoughts. What would you have done? Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.